Hi. Hopefully, most of you know I'm Cody. This is kind of my first full production video setup. Got a couple of GoPros, a nifty lavalier microphone connected to my old iPhone. We're going to see how this works out once I get it all edited together. First off, thank you Patreon patrons for supporting. Thank you everybody else who follows, likes, shares. I appreciate it. You guys are awesome. Today I'm going to be working on some Tequila Mockingbirds, which will throw off the hump. So I'm going to start by wedging up some clay. Then we'll step on over to the handy dandy potter's wheel and throw some tequila shooters off the hump and see what else happens. So let's get started. This is my clay fresh out of the box, fresh out of the bag. I used Laguna B-Mix Cone 10. Can I turn off the music? I use Laguna B-Mix Cone 10, and I always wedge my clay. So it comes out of the factory manufacturing facility, already de-aired from a big giant extruder. I like to wedge it because number one, that's what I was taught. And number two, I think that it, more than de-airing, because like we said, it's already been de-aired, it just gets all the platelets, all the little clay particles kind of aligned in that centrifugal alignment. So when we start centering and throwing on the wheel, we're not fighting against the actual platelet structure of the clay. So it just kind of helps get it a little smooth. So this clay has been, I opened it and cut some, and I guess I didn't close the bag quite as tightly as I should have. So it's a little tough to wedge, but the good thing about this clay is once you start moving it, it gets a little easier to manipulate, which I was always under the impression that the term for that was thixantropic, but I've heard people say thixotropic. I'm not sure which one's correct. I'm pretty sure it's thixantropic. Maybe we'll look it up in Google in post-production and put it down here on the bottom of the screen. So again, what I'm doing when I'm wedging is I'm just rotating that clay around like kneading bread dough to get all those particles aligned in that nice circular motion. So when I go to throw it, it'll be like that. So I'm just going to lift the clay. What I'm doing is I'm pushing down and forward. And if there do happen to be some air bubbles, we'll get them out here. And working with Randy Broadnax, he sits down at the wheel and just takes a whole bag of clay. He'll slap it down and lift it back up and just sit there and wedge it right there on the wheel. I can't do that. I throw on a Shimpo, and it's got a free spooling wheel when it's not engaged, when the drive's not engaged. So number one, that makes it real tough. And number two, I'm not Randy Broadnax. He makes it look like child's play. So now that I've got a decent little wedge going on, it's pretty firm, so we might have to ride it a little bit trying to get centered, but we're going to give it a shot and see. And I'm just kind of compressing the bottom and rounding off any sharp edges, but you can see that spiral we have going on, we've kind of made it into a nice little cone, so when we go to put it on the wheel, it's already kind of aligned, so the particles are actually going to already be in the mood to get centered, which will save us a little bit of effort. All right, so now we've centered our clay. We've got it here. It's a little bit firmer than what I would like to see for throwing, but I'm a professional. We can make this work, as Randy likes to say. My good sponge is gone. As you can see from what of my studio you can see, hopefully you're not judging me too hard. It is pretty messy. Still a lot of work to be done in here. Got to remove some walls, install some lights, put up some cool posters, hang up some art, build a couple of racks. But we're going to get that done thanks to the thanks to the support of all my Patreon supporters and people that buy pottery and all that good stuff. We'll be getting the studio into tip-top shape in no time. hopefully we'll have some classes, some lessons, some people that want to come in and do some work with the extra wheels that I've got floating around in here. But in the meantime, we're gonna make some pots. I always wipe my bat down before I start throwing, but I don't know if you noticed, I took my thumb and I kind of scraped away all that excess moisture, because if it's wet, the clay won't stick to it. So, like, yeah, see? So it started to move, as you saw. So I just kind of recentered it, and I took my finger here and I kind of took to the edge and I rolled it down to kind of make a seal. And I'll just give it a few taps and check that seal at the bottom. So here where the clay meets the bat, it's been smooth and compressed in, so it kind of made a seal. So now, hopefully, the clay will stick when I start to throw it. So because I'm not making one big pot, I don't really have to have the whole 6 or so pounds of clay centered. I really just need to center the part that I'm throwing, which is just the top part. But right now, my hump is what this is called. It's just a large piece of clay that you're going to have centered and just throw smaller pieces off the top of it. It's called throwing off the hump. For those of you who don't know, for those of you who do know, then you know how difficult it is. Or maybe it's not difficult for you. It's difficult for me. I find throwing off the hump, it was one of the last things I learned to do in making pottery, just because it, you know, other than like lids and stuff, but like throwing bowls off the hump, I have so much trouble doing that. And just like anything, probably mostly just because I haven't practiced it enough. But I feel like if I'm going to center a large hunk of clay, I'm going to throw a large pot with it maybe. But I've started trying to use it more and more, because it is pretty convenient not to have to recenter, you know, half a pound of clay for each one of these Tequila Mockingbirds that I'm making. So one of the things that I do when I'm making multiples is I try and do the same process, and I use my tools as measurements. So like I know I get the clay about that same diameter, right? So it's about that around before I start. So I know I'm starting with that much clay, and then I try and stick my finger in up to the first knuckle. So I know that's how deep I go, and then I start my pulls. And eventually at the end of it, the goal is to have it 1 finger tall. So I'll throw it to where the inside is this deep, and that also makes it convenient, because then I can take that measurement, put it on the outside, and I know where on the bottom to cut and still have my thick bottom. And I throw these with extra clay on the bottoms for a couple of reasons. For one, once they dry out till they're hard, I'll flip them over and use my wiggle wire tool, which is, I don't want to say it's my signature, because it's not, but it's a commonly used tool on a lot of the bottoms of my pots. So instead of doing like a trimmed foot, I'll just cut that off, and it'll have kind of a ridged underside. You'll see. It's cool. It's awesome. It'll make your drinks taste better, your friends like you more, all that good stuff. All right, so because of this form, it's really just a straight cylinder. I'm not really pushing in from the outside. I mean, from the inside, I'm not pushing out, because I want to keep it as narrow as possible. So I'm just holding my finger in there, and I'm kind of getting up to it and throwing. And the last time I did them on my middle finger, because I guess when I throw, that's the finger I'm more used to trying to throw with. Okay, so that's just about there. So you can see, so it's that long, and I really want to get just a little bit more out of it, because we don't want to short the pour. Or if you're using it as a bud vase, a little bit deeper to hold that stem just the right way. Get that extra slurry and moisture out of there. So the Tequila Mockingbirds are, they were born from me wanting to make a little bit simpler form, and also to have a little bit of witty fun. So who doesn't like a nice literary pun, or literary reference, I should say. And so I made them, and they're also really convenient when you're loading a kiln. They fit in and around other pieces, so it doesn't take up any extra kiln space, but it's more forms that I can get into a kiln, and every pot I can get into a kiln translates, hopefully, to money at a sale. So that's where the idea started, and I thought, well, I'll make little bud vases, tequila shooters, and then I thought, well, what if I put some imagery on them, and thought, ooh, I'll do mockingbirds, and then do a Tequila Mockingbird. Like Tequila Mockingbird, but Tequila Mockingbird. Get it? Get it? Get it? And then I had a lot of fun at the first show that I took them to, which was Texas Clay Fest this past year, so last October. I just had a lot of fun watching people pick them up, and I sold every one there, so that's where I kind of knew, okay, well, we'll keep making these because people seem to like them. Maybe it's the used car salesman in me, but I believe that people buy you more than they buy the work, if that makes any sense. It's not to say people don't buy the work. Obviously, people buy pots because they like the pots themselves, but if you can make a connection with a human being, you know, there's something memorable about that. And I enjoy those opportunities whenever they come. And when I'm at my booth at a clay sale, I've found that it's a good opportunity to have interactions with people. All right, so I've worked this to death for being a simple cylinder. So we're gonna cut it off and do another one because this one's done. So I'm gonna measure. Okay, so it's a full finger. So then I'm gonna set that on the outside, and I know that the bottom's gonna be right there. So I'm just gonna take a little tool. So again, once those are, okay, so I didn't show that, I'll show it on the next one, but I kind of cut at a little bit of an angle. So it's got like a downward wedge, and then when I set it over here on my board, kind of tap, tap, tap. And what that does is that creates compression. So when you throw a pot, if you've thrown pots, you know this, the first thing you do after setting your floor is compressing that clay so you don't get S-cracks. And one of the biggest reasons I have had trouble in the past throwing off the hump is because throw all these neat pots, trim them, and then they dry out with these big gnarly S-cracks in the bottoms, which is pretty annoying because you spend all that time making a piece and you got the piece the way you want it and it's nice, and then you lose it in drying. So back in the slop bucket it goes, and it has another chance to be a new pot. But I found if you put that little bit of extra angle on the cutoff, then when you tap it on the board you set it on a couple of times, it gets some natural compression from doing that, and then I've had less issues with the S-cracking. Okay, so the first one, that was pretty slow. I spent the last year of my life trying to go faster at the wheel. And when I'm in my studio, I don't need to go as fast as I need to go at work. And I'm not notoriously a speedy person. I'm not well known for my swiftness. Thoroughness, maybe. Awesomeness for sure. But swiftness, not so much. So I'm trying to embody that with the Flash shirt as a way to remind me. I've been thinking about getting a tattoo of like the Flash symbol or something, and kind of making the Flash my spirit animal. So again, I went down to my marker, which is that knuckle. Instead of having an extra tool or making all this other stuff, making all these other things and ways to mark and measure, just use something you've already got, a finger. And now for my pulls, I'm taking that clay to the finger and lifting it up along that finger, so that way I'm not making it wider because I want to keep it narrow. And then again, by trying to make them all fairly uniform, they're still handmade. I'm not trying to make exact replicas. If I was, I would make a mold out of 4 or 5 of them and pour them or press mold them. I still want them to be hand thrown, but I want to be able to hand throw them quickly and efficiently as quickly and efficiently as I can. Okay. I don't want the walls to be any thinner, and it's not quite as deep as I want. Something happened here. I got a wobble in my hump. Might have an air bubble. The clay is throwing nicely, even though it was a little firm. A little bit of throwing water and stretching it out by throwing was enough to make a difference. So it's not too tough to throw. So in the spirit of not being too precise and allowing myself to just kind of flow and make more, there's like a little spot where it lumps out here and a little spot where it lumps in there. And I see those things, and I'm going to not allow myself to get super lasered in on that little tiny spot that, to be honest, most people probably won't notice. I look at that in 2 different ways. If I notice it and take care of it, then that's going to translate into my work as of a higher quality, a finer product. The other school to that is it doesn't matter. It doesn't affect the way it looks. It doesn't affect the way it functions. It doesn't affect the decoration. It doesn't affect the way it feels when you hold it. Really, the only thing it affects is that I know it's there and I can see it. And my brain just wants to be like, no, sit there and rivet for 4 hours until it's perfectly straight. Well, I'm not a machine. So I don't spend too much time. I mean, I have spent too much time. I'm working on not spending too much time focusing on that kind of stuff. So more than a specific measurement, I'm kind of looking at proportions. So based on the width and how tall it is, I want it to have a certain feel. First one was a little bit too flared. It's okay that it's tall, but it didn't need to be that tall. This one's a good height for the width that it is. So again, I do spend a good bit of time looking at the proportions and trying to get a proportional the ratio, of width to height that gives it a more pleasing aesthetic. So if you look and see, you can see that, hopefully you can see that. There's just a little bit of an undercut of an angle there. You can see how it yeah, there goes the first one. So you can see how it kind of wobbles. So I just kind of compress and get it flat. Not so much that it changes the shape or distorts the piece, but just to where it flattens it enough that I know, okay, if it sits flat now, it's been compressed enough that we shouldn't get any S-cracks. So it feels good right now when I hold it, proportion-wise and size-wise. The problem I have with that is clay's going to shrink. So it's going to shrink about 10%. So it's going to be 10% shorter, 10% narrower. So if its proportions feel just right now, they're going to be a little too small after it dries. So we'll go a little bit wider on the next one. And once I get one the way I want it, the proportions feel right, then we should be able to breeze through them pretty quickly. We both know I'd only be in your way. So goodbye. Please don't cry. Know that I wish you joy and happiness, but above all this, I wish you love. And I will always love you. And I will always love you, my darling, you.